They win. This evening, we're going to look into the bond, as we listed there, what's in it, why it's there, what it will cost. And we're going to then lead a Q&A. A little different. Last time we had a meeting, we did a sort of free-form one. We just passed around the mic. Please sign up to speak. There's no time limit or anything. We just want to be a little orderly. Patrick has a pad. He'll be back in a moment, and you can sign up. Pad and pen. We have some guests this evening besides Dr. McCursey and Maureen Caraballo. We have Arena Mandy from PBDW. That's the design architecture firm that we've used. It is a Hastings alum as well. And Matt Milnemow from Land Group, which is our build and engineering architects. And they're here to help answer questions. And as well, these are two people who were, and their organizations, which were fundamental to the genesis of this bond. Because, as we mentioned before, the bond really grew out of two separate efforts. First was one that PBDW did, which was a space analysis about 18 months ago, I would say. They worked through every square foot of the Farragut complex, all 200,000 square feet, seeing what was used, what it was used for, and what time of day. And Matt and his team came in as part of the BCS, that's the Building Conditions Survey. That's a required New York State process to assess the conditions of the structures and their suitability for education. That's every 5 years we produce those. So they have turned that building upside down and shaken it. And so they're here tonight to help provide some of that color commentary. So let's move on to what's in the bond. This might be redundant for some of you, but we'll just cover it again. So proposition number 1 is about infrastructure improvements. I'll read what was written here. District-wide infrastructure improvements. This proposition proposes critical upgrades across district facilities, including mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and masonry work. The focus is on replacing outdated equipment and systems, enhancing building performance, and addressing infrastructure deficiencies to extend the life and efficiency of the schools. It's about the entire cost in the bond is about $11.2 million. And from the presentation that we gave back last October, you can see some of the items that are included in this. These are masonry work that has to happen, brick repointing. There was evidence of water filtration in the top right photo. And there's a certain percentage, which you can speak to later, about how much of the brick is sort of entering the repair zone. Second, it's a lot of mechanicals. As you see there, replace critically obsolete HVAC units, provide mechanical ventilation, upgrade electrical service, providing additional outlets. These buildings, as will come as no surprise, are heavily grandfathered. We do not have, one of the key components of a building code now is to have internal air ventilation. This building largely does not have that. And then as well, for electrical service, as you can guess, a lot of things now run on computers, smart boards. We don't have enough outlets. We don't have enough service in the building as well. This is sort of a summary, and it's impossible to read, but don't worry, I didn't intend for you to read it. This is a summary of the BCS, which Land Group and Matt prepared. I've crossed out, the red part is all the projects that are currently part of Prop 2 and Prop 3. And the reason I did this, I want to give you a sense of how much work qualifies to be on that BCS survey. As you saw before, Prop 1 is $11.2 million. But the amount of work that is on the BCS survey, that number encircled in green is 81, but if you back out all the other projects which are accounted for elsewhere, you're left with $48 million. And I read here, the reality of how much BCS-worthy work we have accumulated, $48 million, speaks to the level of underbonding of capital improvements and deferred work from the 2015 and 2022 BCS reports. So what happens when we defer work and we have so much work to do? We got a glimpse of it this year. As many of you know, we had 2 ceiling collapses. This one occurred in March in the library, unrelated to the December flood. This one cost over $100,000 out of our operating budget to repair in a single weekend. Previous to this one, over the summer, we had a ceiling collapse in 2 classrooms. That was less costly because there was nobody in it. We were able to handle it a little differently. But the bottom line is, this year, when this has become common, we spent $500,000 out of our operating budget for unscheduled repairs. The largest of those, that not included in the 500,000, was the flood that happened in the Farragut building in December on Christmas. I think everybody's aware of it, but the flood absolutely destroyed the building, gutted it. And this work, luckily, will be covered by insurance, but this is going to be $10 million worth of work. And what happened? In a nutshell, we had a fire suppression system that dated from the Eisenhower administration. It was in the roof from 1902. It didn't have enough insulation or what would be standard nowadays. After innumerable freeze-thaw cycles, it failed. The systems that were there to back it up failed, and the resulting flood happened. Something that's not in the BCS, it's not in the $11.2 million, but it's important for people to realize that these classrooms have been there. The youngest classrooms we have from 1931, and we'll go into that in a second. They show it. They're beat up. The flooring, the ceilings, a lot of the spaces look like this. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, hasn't Hastings-on-Hudson bonded a lot? And the answer, as you see up on the left, is no. In the past 30 years, neighboring districts like Dobbs Ferry, Ardsley, and Irvington have bonded between $35 million and $65 million more than Hastings. This little chart here is drawn from what was prepared for the 2018 bond. And as you can see, the annual debt service per student, this was in 2017. Hastings, this would be after the bond, which did pass in 2018. The debt service per student was $1,266 annually, and that compared to Dobbs Ferry at $1,480, Ardsley at $2,270, Irvington at $2,742. Since that chart, okay, included in that $35 million or $65 million more than Hastings, since that chart, Dobbs Ferry passed a bond for $20 million, Ardsley for $50 million, Irvington for $19 million, Edgemont for $62 million, Tarrytown for $92 million. And so there has been a lack of capital bonding in the school system, and it shows up in that BCS, but it also shows up in the buildings, which I'm going to point to in a second. So despite, we've done this under bonding, despite middle school and high school buildings that are 123, 114, 194 years old, despite that all of the educational space in the middle school and the high school date from those buildings. There's not one modern classroom. And apart from the high school science labs that were updated in the year 2000, not a dollar from those bonds, not 2000, not 2014, not 2018, not a dollar was put into the educational spaces. We worked on auditoriums, bathrooms, gyms, fields, needed upgrades, but those spaces have not been touched by any bond. And I have to emphasize, we're not trying to catch up on dollars. Nobody is saying, oh my God, people have overspent us, we need to spend more. But the lack of dollars, the lack of investment is absolutely catching up with us. And the place where that shows up most is in the middle school. This is an educational space comparison at the Farragut Complex. Farragut Complex are the 5 buildings, well 6 with the gym, that comprise the middle school and the high school. In green, you see the dedicated space in the high school. It's about 67,000 square feet for 522 students. In yellow, you see the educational space for the middle school. It's about 38,000 square feet, essentially the same number of students. So a high school student has 127 square feet allocated to them. A middle school student has 74 square feet. That is 42% less space despite having fuller classrooms. So what does it mean to have a fuller classroom? So in high school, there are electives. There are classes that end a certain track, let's say physics. Those are going to end up with a small number of students. The middle school doesn't work like that. Middle school is programmatically the same for everybody, except from some small differentiation. So those classrooms are full. They're programmatically full. It's a much fuller environment, even though it is much, much smaller. I'm going to read this because it's small. The board prepared a letter that kind of summarizes where we're at with the middle school and the size. I'll read it. Though the upcoming bond touches on each of our 3 schools, Proposition number 2 at its heart is an attempt to redress the state of the middle school, which is 40% smaller than the high school, even though it serves the same number of students. This lack of space happened not by design, it happened by downsizing, and flowed from decisions begun in the late 80s and early 90s when the school district fell to under 1,000 students, 40% smaller than it is today. During this time, approximately 10,000 square feet and many classrooms that were in the Farragut complex were turned into offices and a cafeteria. This space never returned to the middle school. As the district population has rebounded, it's currently 1630, along with New York State curriculum mandates and changes to special education, which affect the middle school, the community has made it known to our board that our middle school has become hard to learn in, hard to teach in, and hard to lead. Both data and observation bear this out. Much of the work contained within Proposition 2 seeks, therefore, to redress something fundamental. It is about ingredients which our community may consider central and deserve for every child's opportunity in school: space, light, quiet, and organization. What we know as trustees is that families are more apt to describe their experience of the middle school in these critical formative years in opposite terms, as tight, uncomfortable, loud, and chaotic. And we know that our most vulnerable students are impacted most. Which brings us to Proposition number 2. What's in it? So this is about building construction and improvements, but at its heart, as I mentioned, it is trying to return space to the middle school. It is contingent upon the approval of Prop 1. This measure supports the expansion and modernization of the Farragut Middle School, high school complex. Key components include constructing new classrooms and special education spaces, cafeteria renovations and relocation, a redesigned main entrance, and compliance upgrades to meet current accessibility and safety codes. The value of Prop 2 is about $19 million. So the heart of it, as we mentioned, is taking the current cafeteria and converting it back to middle school educational space. Part of the rationale, apart from what I just mentioned, is that New York State has determined that our existing cafeteria is 50% too small for the population that our school serves. And it will also require equipment upgrades. Even now, if we kept it the way it was, we have a couple $100,000 of equipment upgrades that we need to do. This is the layout. This is the space. That is the current cafeteria. And it's 6,000 square feet. And because it was classrooms, it's very easy to convert back into classrooms. That is one of the rationales when we looked at building new spaces, new rooms. This is by far the most economical thing that we can do. But once we lose the cafeteria, we need to find somewhere else for it to go. Which brings us to the next part of Prop 2, which is a new cafeteria. This is in an unused courtyard between the buildings. The simple headline is that this cafeteria will be 33% larger than the current cafeteria. It's a glass and steel structure. It is in flat apron, essentially flat glass, but curved steel that encloses the courtyard. Here's an interior view. Apart from being 33% larger, it's going to be set up for faster and more organized throughput of meals. One of the things that we hear a lot as trustees and in the district is that children cannot get their meals in time because the service is so chaotic. And you'll see the heads nodding because those were our kids that we lived there. And even, being larger, one of the things that the cafeteria being too small, one of the things that occurs is that children eat in the cafeteria currently, but they eat absolutely everywhere else. They eat in the hallways, they eat along the lockers, they eat in the library, they eat in the stairwells, everywhere. And one of the things we brought up last time is how often we need to have students taking tests in hallways because we lack a testing center. And I'm in the building a lot. I see it all the time, someone sitting at a desk in a hallway and kids running by. It's chaotic. The other part of Prop 2 is a SHPO approved. SHPO is the State Historic Preservation Office. Our buildings are not what's the word? They are historic.
not registered.
They're not registered.
On the historic registry, but they're eligible.
Right, because of their age, they're eligible to be on the historic registry, so any designs that we have to go through the State Historic Preservation Office, which is SHPO. And so this is just a conceptual design. This is not the actual nuts bolts design, but this concept has been approved by SHPO, and it is an ADA compliant entry. Currently, the Farragut complex lacks an ADA compliant entry for the entire complex. It is 5 buildings built at 4 different years, starting in 1902. It has a lot of level changes. It's a complex structure, and we have access issues for students and adults who require them. This would be an ADA compliant entry that would alleviate that. It's also a secure vestibule. It has a so-called man trap, and it is set up to be to meet the modern standards for security, which is another thing that our entrances do not have currently. This is a closer look at it. Proposition number 3, the Burke Athletic Fields. Contingent upon the approval of both Proposition number 1 and Proposition number 2, this proposition funds improvements at the Burke Estate. Planned work includes the installation of a synthetic turf field, construction of a synthetic turf softball field, so there's 2 fields, bleachers and dugouts, as well as site grading, irrigation, drainage, and retaining wall upgrades. This is about $8 million. This is an overhead view of what we're talking about. So the little practice field currently is number 1 there. It is not a field large enough for actual competition, but it does fit a softball field. So the idea is to put the softball field there, and a softball, unlike baseball, doesn't require any raised mound. So even though it is a softball turf field, when the softball's not using it, it is a flat field that we can use for practice and small group instruction, things like that. Second field, Upper Burke, is sort of the marquee field that it's where a lot of things happen. That's going to be lined for all the multi-sports. And then the other fields on the top there, the baseball field will remain grass. The track and field area will remain grass, and Lower Burke as well will remain grass. What's not shown here is Reynolds Field, where football will stay, and the Hillside Field, which will remain for Little League use and for the Hillsiders. So we have 7 fields in Hastings. We're looking at turning 2 of them into artificial surfaces. And the question is, what kind of artificial surface? I lived here since 2005. A lot of us have. We're all very well aware of what went on in 2014 when we tried to install artificial turf. So we've dug very, very deep this time, and we have sourced, we don't buy a specific product in a bond. We put out specs, and providers have to bid back against our specs. And so what I can describe to you is not the actual provider, the actual product. I can tell you the specs that we put out. This is from 2 weeks ago. The highlights of those specs are that the turf field that we consider installing would be a, quote, no infill turf. That means it does not have any rubber infill. Traditional turf requires rubber for shock absorption. This new kind of turf does not require that. The savings there, now it's true, the carpet is plastic. The fill is rubber, but they're both synthetic polymers. In this case, when you do not have rubber fill, you remove up to 80% of the weight of the field. 80% of the synthetic polymer is gone. What also happens when you don't have that is you reduce, one of the concerns about the heat sink, the heat effect of these fields. When you do not have 100,000 pounds of black rubber sitting on a field, it reduces that effect quite dramatically. And this field, because it does not have rubber infill, you are free to use, there are different types of infill. Infill have different attributes. You can put sand, just as an inert substance that helps weigh down the field, which we might do. In the event that it got hot, if there was ever an issue, there is a fill that is calcium carbonate, chalk, and that is used to cool fields in much hotter environments like in Arizona and Texas. And that would be a consideration if it ever proved to be a problem. Although there's no evidence in the Northeast that anybody uses that kind of fill or has that issue. The other big headline is that our spec is that the field would need to be recyclable and or capable of being repurposed. The final 2 specs that are noteworthy, these are both New York State regulations, but of course we'll follow them. That is, the field would have a 12-year warranty, and it would contain no PFAS and of course no lead as well. An additional thing that we looked into That's not part of the field, but it is part of the project. And when people go to vote on Prop 3, it's part of Prop 3. One of the concerns we heard was the concerns about microplastics. There's no rubber in this field, but there is plastic. And one of the concerns we heard was microplastics shedding from the field and entering the waterway. We looked into it, and it's a very real issue. And so we have gone back and asked our technical partners to devise a way that a filter system can be part of the retention system that operates under the field. So you have the artificial surfaces, it rains, the rain goes right through those fields. Those fields shed water at 30 inches per hour, to give you an idea. They enter a network of pipes that are directed to a retention basin and cistern. And that has a lot of technology in it already, but additionally, what we are speccing, and again, what will be part of Prop 3, will be an additional filter capable of removing suspended solids like microplastics. It's very hard to read here, but I'll read you, this is what the spec is. So lastly, referring to this, the stormwater management design for the project will be developed in full compliance with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation stormwater standards, which are quite strict, which we can talk to. The design will incorporate a filtration system to effectively reduce total suspended solids and microplastics, thereby enhancing water quality and supporting environmental sustainability. Big question, what will the bond cost? So right off the top, just to mention, bond payments will not begin until 2029, will not be on resident taxes until 2029 at the earliest. And it's worth noting that Hastings-on-Hudson has a 47.5% reimbursement rate for this bond. That rate is locked in at the time the bond passes and becomes a legal document. We mentioned it before, I won't belabor it tonight, but there's a lot of reason for us to have concerns that that reimbursement rate is going to be going down. Most specifically because it is based on 20-year-old economic data, and the state has said we want to take a look at that data and refresh it because New York State is trying to reallocate the money they spend on education. So there's 3 different home assessments. 1.1 million in the middle we chose because that's sort of an average of Hastings-on-Hudson home assessments. But we put a figure that's about 25% less, $800,000, and 25% more. So if your home has an assessment of $800,000, you will pay $540 a year for the bond. If it's 1.1 million, it would be $720. If it's 1.35, it will be $900. Now, we don't pay for the bond separately. It's part of your school tax bill. So these numbers will be lower. So if you qualify for New York State STAR, which is income-based, or Enhanced STAR, which is age-based, Veterans Exemption, or the local exemptions that our board passed in the previous couple of years. That is the senior exemption, which is income-based, and the firefighter or EMS exemption as well. And these exemptions tend to be cumulative. So it's very hard to get a read on exactly what somebody would pay, but if you're going to ask us or if you're going to figure it out, start from those numbers, but really find out what exemptions you may be eligible for because it applies to the entirety of the tax bill. Another question that comes up a lot is enrollment flat or down? I'm going to take a deep look at this in a second because it's very, very central here. Enrollment is flat, trending up, and I'll show you the chart in a moment. One of the things that gets mentioned a lot, held up as sort of a data point, is, well, the class sizes at Hillside are smaller, kindergarten, 1, 2, 3. The classes in Hastings grow. They grow an average of 10 to 20% before they matriculate through the schools. And the mechanism for that is well understood. We get, I'm sure it would surprise nobody, we get people moving to Hastings largely from the city, largely from Brooklyn. And, when you live in the city, your elementary school is 100% zoned. You can choose the school you want by deciding where you're going to live. When you have a child in middle school, only about half of those schools are zoned. And in high school, none are zoned. So we get families that live in the city for a while, have another kid, or don't like the schooling situation, and then move, and then show up here. So that's really the main driver of why these classes grow over time. They don't stay still, and they don't go down. Most importantly, the in-classroom population has increased. This is really critical to get because we get the question a lot, like 20 years ago it was fine, or even 10 years ago, but things have fundamentally shifted. Most importantly, we have a 80 to 100% increase in classification rate over the past 20 years. These are children who qualify for services like IEPs and 504, special education, we can call it. That rate used to hover around 9-10%, and it climbs, depending upon the year, 17, 18, 19, 20. And this is common not just in Hastings, this is around New York State, because the model of why we help kids and how we help them sooner, it's really, that's the different model, and we do it because it works. We've moved in Hastings to an inclusive schooling model, which I'll show you more data about in a second. And this increases the number of so-called ICT classes. ICT classes are integrated co-taught classes. They have a general education teacher and they have a special education teacher, and they have a population that is mixed between gen ed students and special education students. And the idea in an ICT class is that the special education teacher can provide additional help, support to special ed students, also to general ed students, but it's kind of like a split model, and there's co-teaching that goes on. The ICT classes that we run currently are nearly 30% of the scheduled middle school classes. That number has doubled, even from just 10 years ago, doubled. ICT classes need space to function, okay? So this is a model that Rena prepared with PBDW of 680 square foot classrooms. The current minimum standard, if you wanted to build a new classroom, New York State regulations, is 770 square feet. We have, in the middle school, 19 of 24 classrooms that are below that minimum, and they're well below it. We tend to hover in the high 600s like this. So what you see on the left, number one, is 680 square feet divided among 30 students. That is a very common occurrence, certainly in an ICT classroom. And what's not there, listed there, is you have the two teachers. You often have additional aides, 1, 2, sometimes even 3 aides. So you can have 30, 31, 32, 33, 34 people in a 680 square foot space. And the model of co-teaching, which is the absolute fundamental basis of an ICT classroom, has to go on in that space, where there's no space to split up, there's no space for a teacher to fit between those desks, things like that. So I cannot emphasize enough that the ICT classes have become fundamental to how the middle school operates, how we educate children, and the classrooms do not have the space to accommodate what we need to get done. Even as our 504 and IEP population has nearly doubled, which I mentioned, we keep many more students in district, okay? This is a chart of out-of-district student placements. This is when the school decides that we cannot meet the needs of a special education student, generally speaking, and we send them out of district. You can see this is a 20-year run. So back in the early aughts, our numbers were 43, 40, 40, 37, 39. It's about 3% of the overall student population was being sent out of districts. It was at a very high rate. When that happens, certainly it is a burden to families, and I want to emphasize that. I really want to emphasize that. These are people who live in our community, who have bought houses here, and when you have a child who you have to put on a bus an hour early, because that bus has to pick up a dozen other kids and drive up to Brewster or whatnot, and they come home the same way at 6 o'clock, 7 p.m. at night, it is an absolutely dislocating part of their experience. And that's why the model of how things happens has changed so much over the years, and we've worked very hard to do that. You can see in recent years, the numbers are 14, 13, 10, 10, 10. And again, on a percentage basis, so that we used to be about 3% of the children would be qualified for out of district. It's about 0.6% now, so it's a drop of 70%, 75%. It's also a significant expense when we send children out of district. The cost between the schooling, which we have to pay for, and the busing, it's easily two times the cost, but it can climb to 3 times the cost for a student. So for all these reasons, we've worked very hard to bring students back into the school. And the ICT model, which, by the way, is in Hillside, it is in the middle school, it is also in the high school. It continues through, but again, we're talking mostly about the crunch in the middle school. The ICT model is fundamental to this dynamic. Enrollment. So On the top is a look back to the year 2000. The jump up is just because we anchored some points back in 88 and 89 when the district was as small as it could be. So this is a 20-year run. And what you see is it is relatively flat. There's a bump up as we were heading into COVID. 1712, I believe, is 2019, just before COVID hit. After COVID, it fell, and it's kind of inching its way back up a little bit. The bottom of the graph shows just looking back to 2014, 2015, so you have a different set of, sense of the scale. So getting back to, is enrollment flat or down? And this idea of, well, look at the kindergarten class is small. That's not what we look at. That's not really a very useful data point. We look at the so-called carrying capacity of the village, because that's really what determines enrollment. How many domiciles are there here? Is it growing? As I mentioned, some of the meetings in Hastings, the domiciles grow about 150 every decade, and that's held true for 4 decades, actually. And there's a number of projects that are coming up. It's about availability, it's about pricing, it's about types of housing. It's not even about demographics. People say, well, this is a smaller generation. Ardsley is 47% school children. Tarrytown is 20%. It's the same general area, same demographics. It's all about housing, the cost, things like that. And why this is so important when we look ahead, because we have to look ahead. We're building something for the future. We're legally required to look ahead. The 2025 Village Comp Plan, which was just released, favors increasing population and density. We can take a look at this. So this is draft, but it's from April, so it's very fresh. So Hastings-on-Hudson is aiming for increased housing opportunities, types, price levels, and increasing density. And if you look through section 5, what you'll find on the recommendations, each one speaks to that very fact. So recommendations, evaluate adopting the pro-housing community resolution. The pro-housing community resolution is an effort by New York State to increase the number of housing domiciles in a village by 1% every year, or 3% over the course of 3 years. This is a sort of housing compact that the village is interested in becoming part of. Number 2, conduct a study on opportunities for multifamily zones. Number 3, explore incentives to encourage a mix of housing types, including density bonuses. Number 4, review the view preservation ordinance relative to criteria and applicability, with the idea that view corridors are preserved while also allowing for additional multifamily development. Number 5, review the accessory dwelling unit ordinance to consider simplifying the approval process for ADUs. ADUs, for anybody who doesn't know, this is an effort in New York State to increase the different types of housing. Hastings is a predominantly single-family community, but the idea is that if you have land, you can build what are smaller dwelling units, accessory dwelling units, and then somebody can rent out that, even though that wouldn't qualify normally for the C of O. So it's a change in how we use the land here, and the idea is that people who want to live singly or in a small space will free up a house and a family can move in there. So again, it speaks to the density increasing. Number 6, conduct a study on how changes to parking regulations, including minimum parking requirements to support the development of affordable units. Next one, study suitable areas for commercial, high-density residential, and mixed-use development, including redevelopment potential and economic, tax, and aesthetic impacts. Update zoning as needed. So these are all very worthy goals for all sorts of reasons, but as trustees, when we're thinking about the school, we see increased housing, increased density ahead. And when we look at the 3 buildings in particular, the middle school is where we think that, that's the pressure point. That's where things can absolutely crack. And that's what we're looking at as we look forward. I would note that the 2025 comp plan acknowledges the value and the role of the school. It says here, the 3rd line down in the blue box, second line. Efficient connections to metropolitan areas and regional hubs complement the high quality of life within the village, built on a strong foundation of excellent schools, vibrant public spaces, waterfront access, and a wide range of housing options. I want to note also that when we talk about the role of the school in the village, and particularly in the comp plan, if we go way back to the beginning of the comp plan process, was 2007, when the trustees voted to put the comp plan committee together to really consider all the needs of the village. And as part of that, in 2008, they did a survey, and one of the things that stuck out to me on the survey, I put the yellow dot by it, an overwhelming 73.5% of respondents indicated that the village needs to maintain its excellent public schools. It doesn't surprise me or anybody, because that's fundamental to the value, the housing value of the village. But in the recommendations from the original comp plan, this was published in 2011, we see in Chapter 8, ensuring that schools and other community facilities are sufficiently supported, as well work cooperatively to ensure that schools and other community services are sufficiently supported. And, you know, there's a lot of goals in the comp plans, in the process. And what I want you to notice tonight is that for what we control as trustees, we are trying to present to you, you know, an image of what the school is, how it's going to carry forward and be part of the comprehensiveness of this village. How is it going to be here 10, 20, even 100 years in the future? That's what this bond is really about. Thank you, and we're going to open it for questions. Again, Patrick, right there, has a sign-up pad, and anybody who wants to can go down the list. I'm going to hand the mic over to him.
So far, I have 6 people that have signed up for questions. Any more? And the first one is Peter Wolf.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, how are you? I have 3 interrelated questions. The first goes back to what I raised last time. Looking at Proposition 1, have you actually measured the costs, the operating costs that you currently have? And the reason I'm asking that is, I mean, at home we measure our input and we measure our output. I can even tell you how much electricity my coffee pot has. But the point is that and this is what we talked about last time, you should be examining the current costs for energy and the usage of energy, and that you should be able to, when you do the upgrades, get a much more energy efficient system so that hopefully the operating costs will go down, and that can even be used to offset the cost of Proposition 1, because if you have less energy consumed, even though you have the same type of services, you're ahead of the game. So I'd like you to comment on that.
Sure.
Or I can do all 3 at once.
No, actually, if you do it one by one, I think it's better. And
All right.
want to head that?
Sure. I mean, so the district has entered into EPC agreements in the past, so that's the energy performance, and that has allowed us to offset some upgrades we've done to the buildings. And we are currently exploring, in addition to Prop 1, other measures that could make the building more energy efficient. So there's an ability to get certain upgrades done in which the savings that you receive pays off the amount of the upgrade. Just, you know, like a solar project as an example, but which we actually rent solar, but we've done that with our lighting multiple times. We've engaged in multiple energy performance agreements and our last boiler that was installed under the last bond, larger projects like that, there's not enough savings from doing the other projects to pay for those type of things, but we are currently exploring additional contracts and upgrades that would provide savings in our energy costs.
Right, because if you look at your HVAC plant, for example, if you can get one that's much more energy efficient, even though it may cost a little bit more at the outset, one thing I think is for certain, and that is that the cost of energy is going to increase.
100%.
So that should be thoroughly examined.
Yeah, I want to tee up for Rena and Matt. I mean, to your point, you know, all this entire project is going to meet modern standards. All the mechanicals we have, some of them which are very old, they're much less efficient, which they will quantify, and they don't meet current standards. Can you guys give us a little background on what the mechanical upgrades might look like?
Sure. I'm going to leave Matt to get into some of the details, but I will note that as part of our comprehensive study, we did do a sustainability initiative study. We haven't gotten to the details of exactly which systems could be implemented or designed, but we have that study as a basis reference for when we do go into design with LAN and our engineers to reference as a basis for all of those. So
All right.
that's
Well,
been
that
part of
leads
our
into
work.
the second part, which is Proposition 2. So again, the operating costs are critical. When you are a taxpayer, it doesn't really matter whether you're paying dollars for capital costs or paying dollars for operating costs. So the question is that when you have, for example, a large glass enclosure, that could probably very likely increase the cost, the operating costs. So when you present Proposition 2, I think that you need to be able to include not only the cost of the capital improvement, but the cost that it's going to increase the energy that's going to be used, because that's also part of the dollars that we're going to pay for. So that's number 2. And the third one is really about messaging. The village has voted to be a climate-smart community, and in that there are a lot of provisions that have been made. And I realize that the school board is not bound by what the village does, but they passed something on embodied carbon. And so when you think about it, the type of improvements that you're proposing, you have all the carbon that comes from sourcing the raw materials, from manufacturing, from transporting, from installing, and most of all from maintaining. And I think that not only the community, but I think the children in the community are very much attuned to the environmental implications of what gets done. Last week I got a knock on the door, and there was this little girl with her mother, and she said, are you aware of the fact that there's dripping from your nozzle, from the hose? So, I mean, the kids are really pretty environmentally astute. And when you start building something like this with a relatively stable school population, what type of message does it say to the kids? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, kids love to be together. I mean, I don't know how much inconvenience they are by having a crowded corridor or even a crowded lunchroom. But when they start to think about the type of future they're going to face and the environmental implications, I mean, yesterday, if you saw it, the International Meteorological Organization, which is part of the UN, had some pretty dire forecasts about what these kids are going to be facing. So I don't hear anything about environmental responsibility,
Well, if I can-
to minimize the impacts in the construction of Proposition 2.
Yeah, I would just point out a couple of things that are part of the premise here. Number one, this building has to meet New York State code. We're not even in the design phase. If we wanted to meet Hastings stretch code or other sustainability objectives, that's part of it. That's not, the building has not been designed. It's been kind of,
Conceptualized.
conceptualized is the word. So that's all ahead of us. And if the community supports us moving in that direction, we can put prices onto those things that we're considering, and we can still move in that way. Secondly, to the premise about the cafeteria being hot, I think it's really important to realize that that cafeteria is 2 stories tall. It faces north. It is surrounded by buildings that are 3 stories tall with a peaked roof. It's not, if you go in that courtyard right now, it is not a bright space. It tends to be dark. We will look into it in the design setting, but there's really no expectation that that is going to be any kind of heat issue at all. I would point out, as I did previously, that the village library has 2 stories of glass that face west, and heating, cooling, has not been an issue for that structure, but it is something absolutely we're going to consider. We don't foresee it as being a problem. And with the idea of children, being together, I have to repeat, this is not an observational thing that we've said, well, wouldn't it be great if they had more space? We are hearing from families, we are hearing from parents that this is an educational issue that affects children in the school. So, we look at it with a number of lenses, but that is certainly, as school board members and as parents in the community, that is certainly one that we cannot set aside. It has to be part of the equation. So I take everything you raised as something that we will look into, and we do, but it's a full picture. I'm sorry.
Matt, do you want to comment on any, or Rena on any of these?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll also say that we have a pretty robust sustainability group at PBDW that I'm a lead part of. And so accounting for sustainability is something that we really care about. And there are a lot of facets to sustainability. And I think that part of what we've shown conceptually is that access to the exterior and activating the courtyard and the experience for the kids with visual glazing connection and natural light coming in from the northern facade, which is an even natural light, is something that we want to capitalize on. Whether or not that glass goes all the way up, or there's a fascia, or there's a base, or there's some masonry enclosure on the sides to limit the glazing in certain areas, is a level of design that we haven't gotten to yet because this is just conceptual. But what I think the overall concept shows is that we're looking to bring in as much natural light as possible to this communal space that is a big need for the school, and we've identified as a need for the school to be able to free up the educational space in the proper area of the building for the educational space. I'll also say, just in terms of materiality and stuff, I mean, we've also been brought on to come on for material building standards. And something that we had a discussion on 2 weeks ago was whether or not we should use linoleum floors in classrooms versus what, some of the maintenance staff thought may be more suitable with LVT. And we really brought in specialists to be able to show that linoleum, which is a very sustainable product and completely red list free, very, very healthy as an indoor material for our students, is going to be a standard for the school flooring. So these are things that we are actively not only thinking about, but pursuing already in the schools. So I do want you to be aware of that is part of what we're doing. And if there are facets that we need to massage or that we haven't seen yet, that's because we're really at the kind of concept stage of design. We haven't even gotten into schematics yet.
Thank you, Rena.
Peter, Peter, these are really good questions. There's a very big message, the way we're approaching this, which actually lines up with where you are. Many communities with the situation we have, with a middle school gone, that we have to rebuild, we're saying, how do we work within our existing space with the slight expansion into the courtyard in a very efficient way? So efficiencies for the sake really of environmental purposes is what we're at. So the message to our students is, we're not going grand in extra space. It's a modest increase where it's dramatically needed for instructional and learning purposes, but within our existing space. I can point from my experience to hundreds upon hundreds of school districts that would be going to the community now to say, we need Burke Estate to build a brand new building. We need to tear down what's here. We don't have to go far to see that in the state of New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Massachusetts, go to the Midwest. So actually, to your exact point, it's a great point. Our students are learning through this to say, we will maximize, optimize what we have largely within the existing footprint, rearrange it so it's better for you, as opposed to building out in ways. And the other part of that fundamentally is deep respect for the taxpayers. Deep respect to get to that sweet spot between real need and respecting that this costs, and that cost is on all of you as residents. So your point is very well taken and is at the heart of what we're trying to do with there's a learning message here for our students.
Thank you, Peter.
Question, and then with your permission, kind permission, a follow-up. And I'll be brief, 90 seconds. Does it make sense to build an expensive glass and steel cafeteria in order to gain, and the number's not in the bond? I've watched your videos. On April 8th, you said 7 classrooms. As of May 16th, it's down to 5 classrooms and a small instructional space. In any event, does it make sense to do that when your own business manager, Maureen Caraballo, recently warned 7 weeks ago that the district is looking at potentially serious reductions in staffing? We're in a period of extreme economic uncertainty right now. New Rochelle just announced massive teacher layoffs amid their budget crisis, which I learned from Maureen. On March 25th, Dr. McCursey himself said Hastings is, quote, on a tightrope financially. Health insurance costs are through the roof, and this high-cost bond will only make it harder, if not impossible, for the school district to come to the community to bust the property tax cap. On what basis would I suggest that? 2022-23 budget failed. And it failed, according to Mr. Del Piaz, primarily because that was the first time you had a payment for the last bond, and the community wouldn't support the budget, and the district paid the price for that. And that's what you're looking, and that budget was tax compliant, right? That budget was
Tax cap compliant.
Tax cap compliant. Students today are ending up in study hall because the high school is not offering enough electives. And now we're looking at staff and teacher layoffs? There is the question. Here it is. How does adding classrooms and laying off teachers make sense? And then I do have a follow-up.
I want to show you something. It's actually, I'll get back. So, at the heart of it, first off, there are no teacher layoffs planned. That's not a thing. If we go back to, hold on, let's go back to this. So, the
Future.
I'm quoting Maureen Caraballo, serious reduction.
So a couple of different facts here. First off, Hastings is not looking at laying off teachers. We live on a tightrope, which I'm going to take you on in a second. If we held our revenue flat this year, if we said revenue is going to be 0% increase, we would need, in order to balance the budget next year, we would have to cut maybe $1.5, $1.7 million. That is the amount. Our school system, we have very little discretionary spending. We are a pass-through for statutory costs that come from New York State, whether it is funding health insurance, whether it is contractual, inflation, escalation, things like that. We're always on a tightrope. So I'm going to show you what that tightrope looks like, but just let's go back to this here. So the rooms, there are 5 classrooms, 6,000 square feet. Okay, the middle school currently has 33,000 square feet, so it's almost a 20% increase in space. It is 4 science classrooms. Why science classrooms? The current science classrooms are built larger because they had to accommodate larger desks. So by building new ones, we can take the largest rooms we have and we can repurpose them for the larger needs that we have. It is a sort of double use. 4 science classrooms, there's an art room, which is another type of large room that we do have, and the other, that's 5 classrooms, and the 6th is a small group instructional space. This is used for special education.
I was just going to say that, speaking from the instructional standpoint, because that's always my vantage point, part of the reason why these science classrooms are so important is we're in the next generation science standards right now. There are new tests that we're preparing our students for, and the good news is they push critical thinking skills, enhanced reading skills, but also more lab work and hands-on learning for our students, and that's the kind of direct learning and instruction that we want to see them doing in the middle school, and it's that kind of engagement that is particularly enriching.
Thank you. So that space there is for small group instruction. So that would apply to special education, and it would apply to supportive help for non-special ed students. Let me take you here. So one of the questions that you're raising comes back to something I prepared here, which is, Why does New York State education cost so much? Why does it cost so much in Hastings? And I think I want to share this here. Number one, there are very high input costs. Maureen, could you, for our health insurance for the district, it increased how much last year?
Just shy of 10%.
And the year previous?
Well, this upcoming year, it's going to be 10%. This year, it was 9%, and the year before, I think it was 8%.
Right.
Yeah.
We have relatively low New York State support, and this is something that's going to shock a lot of people. And we know that education in New York State costs a lot. This data holds true, but this is from 2020, 2021. The bar at the top is New York State at $28,000. The U.S. average is $14,000. New York State has by far the highest per student education costs. Hastings is at the same median that the state has, I think $35,000 last year. The costs of everything in New York State are high, and it all goes into the cost that we pay. But what New York State doesn't do is put very much money back into the school systems. This is a chart of how much states return their state funding into the K-12 school system. I apologize, it's very hard to read. At the top, that's the blue, okay? The blue is how much money they put back into their schools. Vermont is up at the top. New York in bold is 43 out of 50 states. It is below Florida and it is below Texas. New York State has what I would call an antiquated model of funding schools. It puts very little money back into local school system. It depends on taxes, and it depends on an era when these villages had an industrial base. The waterfront, what used to be at the waterfront in Hastings, paid 30% of the school taxes by itself. A lot more shopping went on here. It's reasonable to say that 40 or more % of the school taxes were paid by a tax base here. Same thing with the old lumber yards up in Irvington, or the GM factory up in Tarrytown. So we don't have state support that people think, and we don't have a commercial tax base. Let me just go back here. I want to show you, this is the per pupil spend comparison from this budget. You can see Hastings, this is about $37,000, which is close to the state average. And I'll leave this up here, people can see the different spending levels. But, to your point, we're always on a tightrope, but it is not because this is some profligate district. I showed you the slides earlier that we have been underbonded by $35 to $65 million. There are things that come out of our operating budget. When we send a special education student that doesn't fit in the classroom, when we send them out, that is 2-3 times more expensive. When we have games that are canceled on fields, we pay for buses. When we have ceilings break, we spend $500,000. It's expensive to not put money into the school system. So I really want people to understand that. So I'll hand it back for your next question.
Thanks. And Teresa, just to be very, very clear, because I'm really not misspeaking here, but I owe it to you. Maureen Caraballo said that you would potentially in the future be looking at serious reductions in staffing. On April 8th, if you look at the video, it is (2 hours and 42 minutes and 15 seconds) into the videotape, okay? So I'm paying a little attention. I didn't make it up. I know that you didn't think that I know that there are no layoffs happening. That's not what I said. I said she warned that in fact, what she said is it's very easy to fall off a fiscal cliff, right? You remember she said that?
We were talking about our 5-year plan, and I think, as Alex
Okay,
said...
and this bond isn't
No,
coming up for
absolutely,
another...
I agree with, I said that, that's...
Yeah, absolutely. And in that and this thing is structured so that it comes. Here's my second question. Here's my follow-up. And this has to do with the turf. And you'll forgive me if I get a little emotional, because on this one, I have a dear friend who suffered a catastrophic sports injury. And if you've known anyone who has suffered that way, you'll understand the concern. Grass is better for the environment, and the latest studies that we have, which is out of Washington State, Washington Medicine, 58% high school athletes, not talking about college or professional, high school athletes, are 58% more likely to sustain injuries on artificial turf, okay? In any event, in a healthy society, we debate and then we vote. Dr. McCursey just mentioned the deep respect that you all have for taxpayers. So forgive my directness, but
So
on
do you have a-
April 1st,
Mark,
on
do you have
April
a question?
I do have a question, here it comes. On April 1st, a scheme was floated whereby this board would do an end run around the community and, quote, vote the product in out of reserves. You want the timestamp on that one? I'll tell you I'll give you the timestamp, anybody that wants it. When the scheme failed, it was decided on April 22nd that the referendum would avoid any specifics on the type of turf, so the board would have free rein, and again, I'm going to quote, on the crumb rubber issue.
So do you have a question?
Okay, and here's the question. Allow me, you have a lot of information. I need to give this to you. Here's the question. This was just last month. This was just last month that this happened. So the preliminary turf specs that we're reading about are irrelevant. If the board gets approval, here's the question. If the board gets approval on turf, you have 6 months to write and rewrite the specs within legal limits any way you want. Do you not? We don't get to vote on them. You do.
We put forward, to your point, you can hand it off. By law, we're barred from choosing a product. We put forward specs, which I've shown you tonight, which we're transparent about. You vote on the specs. If you vote on those specs, if a product doesn't meet those specs, it won't be allowed into the bid process. That's the legal document. I don't know how else we can plainly say it. It sounds like you don't have a good faith sense that we'll abide by that, but I don't understand where that's coming from, so it's foreign to me. But what I can tell you is that the specs we put out will be what you vote on, and there's not a product that doesn't meet those specs that will be put in. So.
Yeah, let me just say, is we have a lot of people in the room. Everything, I do a lot of writing. I put my record in the writing. We are in public meetings. Everything's recorded. There are contextual moments, context around comments. I really have no idea of what you're speaking to. I respect that you heard it, but I want everyone in this room to say I think the outcome matters. There was never, ever a vote by the board around anything around using reserve funds or anything for any of this. It was all complete. I listened.
Okay, that's fine. Let's move on.
Yeah,
Let's move on.
I didn't say you said a vote. What I said is that the board itself never, ever looked at any use of reserve funds for anything that would be other than something we use and have as a right in the state of New York for various needs, separate from the fields and all the rest. There have been a lot of discussions on my part as a superintendent since I arrived here because of the importance in New York State having reserve funds. Previous state, Connecticut, is now caught up with New York. But here's the point. Everything in this bond is by the board, advocated by the administration, designed to give full opportunity for vote across these three major questions, to allow you as voters, particularly on number 3, the turf, to vote your conscience and your feelings. It's fundamentally a small d democratic process that we insist on. So it's there for you to vote on. And specs were put together, my work, Alex's work, others' work, so you could begin to see the specs that would then guide us later. So you have the information you need to vote on, and then there'll be lots of work after that. I just want to have that as the comment, because it's all about full disclosure and work in the public.
Thank you.
Joyce D. Vabilis.
Good evening.
Yes, I'd like to speak to Proposition 2. I'd like to address the architects that you've engaged, PBDW. I looked at their website and I found a long list of high-end projects. Among the 20 cultural projects, there were sites such as the Park Avenue Armory, the New York Historical Society, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Among the 9 educational projects were the Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School, the Spence School, Vassar College's Van Ingen Art Gallery, but there was one public school, Hastings' own Hillside Elementary. I looked at the commercial properties, and there were sites like Park Lane Hotel, Equinox Interiors, Equinox Greenwich Village flagships. All of these are very high-end, state-of-the-art designs and reflect the typical wealth of PBDW's clientele. And I haven't been here long, but this is a small village of 8,000 residents, and I don't see that kind of wealth being spent on Proposition 2. What about the state-of-the-art improvements for the village municipal building? Will the village be able to raise taxes for refurbishing it after committing to this $38.5 million bond? I'm curious, what other architectural firms have been consulted, and what were the costs of their designs for the high school and middle school? Can you say for certain you have created the most cost-effective plan for what you see as the most essential facility challenges?
So, implicit in your question isn't, no, for sure. You want to speak first? Okay, go ahead. You want me to speak first?
Either one.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Rena.
He said,
Sorry.
Oh, me go.
Alex.
So implicit in the question is an idea that because PBDW has done fancy projects, that their skills are expensive. And I would just have to say that premise is incorrect. One of the reasons they did Hillside, Ray Duvall, one of the principals in that firm, is a Hastings resident. Rena herself is a Hastings graduate. That's sort of our connection to that firm. And they worked on Hillside. So they are designers. There is nothing inherently expensive by somebody's approach to designing a building. So I just think the premise is I just disagree with the premise. But Rena, if you want to discuss
sure.
the process.
Is my mic on now? I don't know if you could hear me before. I appreciate you looking at our website, but I would say we bring a huge amount of knowledge from our prior work. Someone who was going to come with me tonight is our Director of Education, Erica Gasworth. A huge sector of our work is education. A lot of our projects are in New York City and for private schools in New York City, but we do this effort a lot and do it a bit differently than maybe has been typical and typically done in Hastings. And I would actually really credit this administration for recognizing what's needed for the school, not to bring us in, but in terms of just to back up and give people a little bit of history, and I hope you don't mind me sharing some of this. There have been needs for the school for a long time, for the middle school specifically, but just generally disparate disparate department locations and tight spaces, and that feeling being experienced by the teachers, by the students, by the administration for a long time. But no one had ever done a comprehensive planning study to really analyze what the genesis of that was and what the full scale of potential solutions could be done. So I think about 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, there was another firm engaged, and they had proposed I'm not sure the full extent of it, but they had proposed a solution, and the district really felt this is not the solution that we need. This is only tackling a need by putting a Band-Aid on it. And Hastings has typically been more reactive in addressing their needs, and so responsibly so, Maureen reached out to us and said, what do you advise we do? And engaged us in a comprehensive planning and analysis and programming phase that took months over the last year. And we came into that without any design intent at all. It was a long listening process, and mostly listening from teachers who said to us, wow, this is the first time in 20, 30 years that people have ever asked us these questions about our facilities. And we have a big programming document that really distilled the needs of the school and analyzed the program space of the school. And we paused there and presented that to the board, I think it was in March of last year. And that was before we got into any design. I mean, it was a huge effort to really listen and understand what the school's experiencing and going through. And that's the kind of expertise that we would bring. I would say that's very different than a typical process that a bond would go through, because the level of investment that the school has done before this bond is more than what they've done before and what is typically done before. Because of that, because they knew we can't just keep being reactive. We need to understand these buildings are aging, and we've been living with them for a long time, and how do we set the school up for the future, and how do we kind of unclog the clogged areas? And so we were able to really identify the needs very well because of that, and then started a process of coming up with solutions to potentially solve some of those. And we actually went into solutions to try to address all of them, and the bond only addressed, we broke that up into 4 different parts, because knowing that can't all be tackled at once, and that's way too much to take on. And the bond addresses kind of the first portion of that really helps to unlock the future of Hastings by moving that cafeteria out of an inadequate space that it never used to be in, that is really prime for classroom space for the middle school, and moving that into the courtyard, reusing 2 of the walls of the courtyard and enclosing that space for a new large span cafeteria space, which is what you want. You don't necessarily want a cafeteria with columns all the way through. I mean, it's a big open gathering space. So, and activating that courtyard, which enhances the connection to greenery, the small amount of greenery that is around the Farragut complex. And that was really the genesis of how we came up with our design. So I wouldn't say that we approach anything with a particular expense in mind, with a particular aesthetic in mind, with a particular cost association in mind, but in being responsible. And we are working with partners.
Can I mention?
So there are plenty of other architects who are looking at this.
Yeah, can I mention, so just to the question you asked also, to the point that Dr. McCursey made, there are plenty of architects who would come in and say, build something on Burke, build a new structure on Burke. The very starting point, one of the answers we got was, build out from the gym onto the playground for the middle school. That's where we said, hold on, nah. One of the reasons we like PBDW is because they've done a lot of retrofit into old buildings, into tight spaces. And that was, very quickly we could see, going to be a key challenge for this project. It is a retrofit. It is working with old buildings, tight spaces, not just an obstacle locally, but when you deal with New York State, you have to navigate any number of regulations and requirements. They had that experience. Also, to the point that you raised, Land Group, they're from Goshen, New York. And they do schools. They do educational spaces. So, that makes it a little more amenable. That's
like a check and balance, yeah.
And what the reason we chose Land Group, one of the big reasons was when they showed us how well they budgeted. There are firms that budget whatever, and then you get overages and change orders. How tight, how accurately they budgeted their projects, how close they came into the actual number. So this whole thing is based upon generating value from what we have it is about reuse, it is about upcycling, if you want to say. And both these firms have a deep technical knowledge which makes that actually possible. And that's really the heart of why they were chosen. I mean, Matt, if you want to talk about Land Group a little.
Is that
Okay, good, this thing's on. I was hoping to just come here for the popcorn, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak just a little bit. My name is Matt Milnamo. I'm the principal of Land Associates. We really are a K-12 specialist. It's what we do. It's over 60% of our company revenue. I've been with the company for over 20 years, and it's pretty much all I've been doing for the last 20 years. This is really I would call an encouraged partnership, not a forced partnership. We've entered into a lot of school districts and been encouraged to work with other design partners. And we've really enjoyed the relationship we've been able to endure with PBDW with Rena at the helm. She really has a lot of value to add to the process. This school district is very blessed to have somebody who understands the inner workings, who has the relationships, who understands the facilities, as well as Rena does and her firm does. And it's atypical for us to work with a school district where another firm has done such homework before we've entered into the school district and worked in a partnership to really lay the framework out for a referendum that is very well planned, very well thought out, with a lot of other options that were explored before we were brought to the table. So when we were asked to come in, we came in and thought more analytically and said, is this the way we would do it?
Yeah.
And we came to the conclusion that this, in a lot of ways, is a way that we've tackled other projects in other school districts. If any of you have been to Bronxville Union Free School District, we put a cafeteria within the center of the building, in a building that's over 100 years old, to activate the corridor. And basically, it's a very similar project, very similar approach to the approach of the cafeteria within the inner courtyard here. So we really do like this option. We really do want to underscore and PBDW's understanding of the building, understanding of the staff, the groundwork that they've put in to understanding what the teachers need and what the students need is very unusual for referendums that we're a part of. So we feel very fortunate that the school district asked us to be a part of this team. We did earn the business through a competitive process. Just to speak to the person who asked the question, our fees are within the normal range of fees that we typically charge other school districts, of which we work for nearly 15 in the lower Hudson Valley area.
But if I might just underscore something, in Hastings, people understand complex problems require multiple points of view. It was highly intentional at the point that Land won the competitive RFP bid. A couple of us had the conversation with Matt to say, we have an existing firm. In a sense, you're now going to check that work. Similarly, PBW is going to check your work. The best way to a solution, particularly for Hastings taxpayers, is to know that multiple points of view were brought together systematically to understand the best approach here, as opposed to saying, we got the idea, charge. No, we have an idea. The board is, have elected this board, they push and probe from multiple points of view. The design then on the architectural firm and engineers was push and probe, give us multiple points of view so we stand at the best outcome. So that's fundamental to the design here, which hopefully would give some of you assurance that where we've landed is based on a lot of great critical thinking from multiple points of view to get to that best place what our students need and is efficient for you as taxpayers.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the last part I'll bring up is, at the end of the day, what is the square foot number of the construction compared to square foot construction numbers in other like-sized buildings? And I think, the design is the design. Of course, it's a huge investment in the district, and we do want it to also, function and look a certain way, and have being it's a large investment. But I think also, if the bond is successful, there'll be a construction manager that is brought on, and they're really there to ensure that the square footage number and the cost of the construction is, stays within the budget, but also is in line, with what is the cost in, like, say, Ardsley, when they, how much, and I believe they were at about I use that because I think currently for the addition, it's like $1,000 per square foot, which is a very healthy budget that allows for what we hope is less contingencies and, a lower dollar amount ultimately. But as you look around, I think in the region, you're looking at schools are seeing in that $900 square foot range to $1,000. So I say that just being that it doesn't cost, it seems as though it's in line with the square foot numbers that other districts, whomever's designing it, it kind of falls within there. So I think that's kind of when we look at it from that basis, to make sure that it's in line and not over-designed.
Thank you.
Kathy Sullivan?
Hello, I'm Kathy Sullivan.
Hello.
Earlier this week, I walked over to the school. I read in the referendum that there were going to be plans and things available for the public to look at. And when I went there, I was asked to go to out the vending machine outside the Cochrane Gym and look at three posters that were up by the architects. There was no information on Prop 1. There was no information on Prop 3. And I walked away from there feeling like the public was being disrespected by the administration. This was, I gather, a legal requirement for information to be there, but there was none to be had. There have been a lot of numbers tossed around. We're underbonded by so much money. Our cafeteria is half the size it should be. That the reimbursement is 47.5%, and that the difference in the space between the high school and the middle school is 20%, sometimes 40%, but I think it's averaged about 20% now. These, you have to do the math. You have to show your math. That's what you get in your math class. You have to show how you get these numbers. And the difference that I see is when you look at them, the high school, for example, that the middle school is so much at a disadvantage, when you look at the numbers that they're adding in for the high school, includes both gyms, the auditorium, and that will sway anything. Alex is shaking his head. But it would be helpful to show everybody this.
Sure, it's right here.
Well, I understand
There
that.
is an appendix that does show the math.
Right?
Yeah, so.
There is an appendix that does show the math for this,
Right. and
this chart.
If you look at it, it includes,
Can I just point out here, no, the shared spaces which you're referencing are that kind of tan zone there. That's gyms, auditorium, cafeteria. This slide, these numbers are the green. This is an instructional space. This is the high school instructional space, which is 66,000, and then it's the middle school down at 33. So the yellow is the dedicated middle school
Correct.
space.
I understand.
And the green, so just to point out, these are accurate numbers.
right, but I mean, I'm saying in the number for the high school is included some very large spaces. But I would just ask, if you make that statement that it's such percent smaller, or that high school is so much greater, then just be clear about it to people and show the math.
Okay, sure. I mean, it's 40%, the two numbers here. I need reading glasses, 66.5 and 38.5.
I have
Alex, she's right. There are large numbers that are specifically for the high school. There are also large numbers that are specifically for the middle school, like the middle school auditorium,
Right.
and
So
the
they are,
Farragut
yeah.
gym. But if you back those out, we have another chart. If you back those out, there's a similar disparity with just classrooms.
Yeah.
There's an appendix in the master plan. I need to look at which date.
What I would just say is, the point I'm making is, if you're going to make a claim, show the math.
Fair enough.
I can look at indexes, I can look at this and do the math. I did all that. It's not easy to find. So
fair
when you
enough.
make a statement that one of the major goals for this project is to overcome a space differential between the high school and the middle school because of inequities, then show the math. And I'd like to also make a point that you happen to have primary school students in the middle school population. If I'm not mistaken, the fifth graders stay in one classroom most of the day. So they aren't going to have the same kind of needs as a senior does, who's running around between different classes. So if that's a kind of a potentially false comparison. I also like to mention that when you compare the bonding of one community to another, that's a little bit like apples and oranges unless you look into the basket and find out what it was. I appreciate that information, but it doesn't make me feel that Hastings has any great desire to catch up with anyone else. Ardsley's latest bond, I think, included repairs to 3 different schools. So these schools even though they're same in size as we are, they may have more properties to take care of. The other point I'd like to ask about, and this is something that's, I think, very germane to the process of relocating the cafeterias, what's the existing capacity? What is the new capacity? And why does the new cafeteria make the overcrowding in the lunchtime any better? That would be very helpful
Sure.
to get.
So,
And-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll preface it here. So the current cafeteria is 3,800 square feet. The new one would be 5,300. So it is 33% larger. And then as far as how, and Rena can speak to this, or maybe Matt, how it is arranged for kids to get food service. Currently in the cafeteria, there are multiple rooms that people have to wind through in order to get their meals. The way this would be set up would be for one single column for faster throughput of food.
My point isn't that. My point is there are X number of students that need to have lunch. And there's how many seats you need to provide is related to the number of students divided by the period of how many lunch periods they have. That tells you the size of cafeteria you need. That's what I'm looking for. They've only had table numbers on these drawings. There's been no idea of any occupancy. And like I said, I really would like to know how the new cafeteria is going to solve the problem of kids eating all over the school.
We'll speak to that in a second, but I want to point out that when we started this whole project, we knew we wanted to switch the cafeteria over to classrooms, and our concern was, and what we believed was that New York State was not going to cover, they were not going to reimburse on the cafeteria project because we already had a cafeteria. So the numbers you speak to, New York State, they do analysis for spaces, and what New York State says, what New York State told us, was your cafeteria is 50% too small for the population that you serve. And that is why it's reimbursable. So, Rena or Matt, if you want to sort of backfill on what that looks like in real terms. But it's, we're making it larger and it's vastly too small.
But that's based on students. That's based on the number of students it has to serve, not so much the square footage. So that's the type of thing we just explain. How many students can it serve, and how are you helping this process out? That's a big rationale. You're doing the cafeteria, you're making it so big because it's going to help kids not eat lunch all over the school. How does that
Well,
happen?
just by practicality, they have a place to sit. One reason they don't eat in the cafeteria is because it's full. They don't have a room. So we're adding 33% more space.
But that doesn't tell me how it solves the problem of how many people, how many periods, how big it has to be. So just getting a sense of the numbers,
That's fair enough.
the seating numbers would be very helpful.
Okay,
for
that's
people to
fine. I think that-
understand why. Because this cafeteria is $1,000 a square foot when you build it. That's, if you get rid of a few square feet, you've saved some money. The last thing I'd like to say is that I think this has been a problem with transparency from the board. And one of the things that's been going on, Farragut's been completely a fair game now. It's had the disaster of the flooding, but it gives an opportunity for the school district to reimagine it, I can imagine. And there's been no conversation about how this bond work interacts with the major work redoing of Farragut. And to the point is that initially the classrooms that have been added have been general classrooms. Then they've been special ed classrooms, and there's been a very good, strong argument for that. And now they're labs. So it's the need for these things are I imagine is true, but the reasons why are varied. And that's a lack of transparency that I think that the board
Can
may
I
have
just
to
answer
address.
the question about, so part of your question is the flood in the Farragut wing, how did that affect the bond? And that's a public discussion that we have had. And what we mentioned 6-8 weeks ago is that there was about $1.5 million of overlap of work, that because that is going to be handled within the reconstruction of the Farragut wing, it was removed from the bond. That's something that we've discussed in a public meeting.
Yeah, and we've had a good question. It may have come in, Kathy, from you, and we have a draft on that exact question. Very specifically, right now it's about a page answer. It's getting reviewed to be very specific, picking up on there have been 3 board presentations on this, at least, tying the bond work back into the Farragut flood and the issues there and the savings from the bond, what would have been, but actually able to reduce that because we're picking it up work specifically, to bring back the Farragut complex. The bulk of that wing will come back as is. We need those classrooms. They're at code, those size. That lower floor, we are doing some redesign work to get some smaller need for instructional space. We have some creative options there, and there may be a shifting of the middle school office into a better spot. But the rest of that will be largely as is. The answer that we're going to have out, and it's getting reviewed right now, we'll put it up, is to be very clear, is it going right to your asking, what is the connection between the two? How are the two getting paid for? And there is a savings of some nearly $1.5 million relative to what could have been additional cost for the bond. So we'll speak to that very clearly. We have a definite answer on the square footage for the cafeteria. We're not going to 50% plus, but we are increasing it enough so there's enough room in that space, and maybe Rena or Matt could speak to that, to allow for full seating of all students who are in an assigned period there, plus anyone who's been into that space or had their children report to them about it. I'm in there every single day for a good half hour. Is if you literally imagine that area, front area, from where you're standing up to this table, that's the entire service area for up to 500 children flowing through to get their food, and they go into a U. That is the entire serving area. Then there's one other would be right behind you. In the least, we would have to redesign that. That is part of the square footage gain. But we have an answer. It's a good question. And we should speak to, there is a gain on square footage on this cafeteria. Still modest. We're not going to full double size, which we could based on the state's analysis, but there is an increase to allow for seating space and much more efficient. It's in the image, the rendering we have, much more efficiency in the serving areas to shorten the time that it takes students to get their food.
All right.
Yeah, I think both have said it very well. I also just want to underscore that, some of these needs have been identified, and we're not going to the full extent to meet those needs. We're going to a more modest extent to meet those needs, to be able to give the school what they need and also be responsible about it. So it's not a cafeteria that's 50% larger than it is, right? Or 100% larger than it is. Most schools where you have a middle school and high school would have two separate cafeterias in two separate buildings.
Right.
Right? We have one cafeteria that serves both populations, and we're kind of modestly increasing that by 33%.
See, I will just have one more point. I've taken this mic for too long. That's fine, but the square footage needs to be turned into students, and students who are at a certain period who need to have a seat. And I just want to see how that lays out.
Yeah, there are three, that's in part of the master plan. We can get into some of those details, but there are 3 different lunch periods. There are 2 lunch periods for middle school. Middle school students are, in very, very fast lunch turnarounds, and so that's why the serving line has been so important, because middle school students specifically, spend 20 minutes in the cafeteria and 20 minutes outside during a 40-minute lunch period. And so how quickly they can get their food often dictates how quickly they can eat. And that's why there are a lot of students who end up getting their food and bringing it to the next period class with them, because it takes them so long to be able to get through the serving line. So that's why part of the design is to really open up and resolve the serving line so that you can get more students through faster. So it's not just about the seat per student, it's really about the flow through the cafeteria and being able to expedite that process. And once we get into the specifics and design of the bond, hopefully, if this does pass, there'll be a kitchen consultant on board. We'd get into all of those specifics in much, much more detail.
I mean for just general understanding of why we're going to be asked to pay for the bond and pay for this cafeteria at this side. It would be helpful to know how it resolves the seating problem. Like I said, how many students need a place to sit, and how does the cafeteria accommodate that? The last thing I want to say is there's been some talk about planning ahead by looking at the comprehensive plan. There's been talk about growing, making sure you're available for growth. Why isn't the board considering adding a second level to that cafeteria? I mean, why not build in for the future?
Can I? I'll answer that. You know, I think you mean like put classrooms. You would sequester the existing classrooms within the middle of the building. I mean, it wouldn't even be codable, really. It's not. You know, to Rena's point, we're building to accommodate the reasonable needs that fit the term of time that we're looking at. You know, we could build lots more stuff, but it's not feasible for the community, and it's not, you know, it's not supportable in a plan that over the term that we're looking. So, I mean,
I think at one point the board had asked us to look at what if we put classrooms in this addition instead of the cafeteria, and because of requirements for light and air for classrooms and whatnot, there would be a lot of classrooms on the interior of the space and not as many classrooms on the exterior, so it actually really wasn't efficient at all. I mean, this is a large space that's really meant to be a long spanning space. This rendering, I also just want to point out, is conceptual. It doesn't show, you know, roof structure and joists. It doesn't show mechanical systems. So that ceiling plane up there is going to come down and down as we add all of those in. We're also trying to preserve the windows from the existing guidance classroom and from the existing hallway. I mean, primarily coming in from the high school lobby down, and from on the east side is the faculty lounge as well. So we're trying to preserve light coming into those office areas and those administrative areas as well. So we didn't want to put a ceiling plane below that, have, you know, a very like 8-foot ceiling and a long span space or columns throughout. It doesn't make sense to do that for the cafeteria space.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Roger Torta. It's late. I'll give a gift to all of you by asking what I think is a very simple, factual question and probably a short answer. It's just something that I've been wondering about and haven't seen an answer to. The 47%, I believe, that you expect to get back from the state for some portion of this project, what happens to that money? I mean, in an ideal world, I would hope that that would lower the amount of money that you need to accomplish your goals. I'm guessing it's not that simple. What happens to that money?
So I'll hand it off to Maureen in a second, but the 47.5, to be clear, applies to the entirety of the project. So it's not just the portions. Everything we're talking about, Prop 1, Prop 2, Prop 3, every aspect of it. So Maureen, if you want to describe the mechanics of how state reimbursement works.
Yes, so once the projects are fully closed out and you submit all the paperwork to the state, about 18 months after that time frame, we start receiving the aid back as part of our state aid package. It comes like the number, like currently this year, the amount of money we're getting in state aid, there's part of that is building aid. So it comes back in through aid payments to us, and it's 18 months after the projects are closed out. We'll be receiving that over a 15-year period.
So it becomes operating?
It becomes operating, but similarly, the debt is in our operating budget, and then you have an offsetting revenue that helps minimize the tax impact because you're receiving a higher level of revenue in those years.
I'm sorry, could you just explain that a little more clearly? How does it affect the tax revenue? I don't understand the relationship.
So when you receive more revenue in state aid, by default, like you need less money in taxes.
Less
because,
taxes.
you know, you're getting more money in that revenue line. As those dollars come back in, it helps, we're paying that debt on the expense side of the budget, but then the coinciding revenue from the state is coming in, which then helps us by default, it gives us more revenue and lessens the tax burden.
It's yearly income. The
Yes,
state
yearly
pays back,
income, yeah.
and it's a block of the 47.5%. That amount is broken up into 15 amortized payments, and each year the school gets one of those payments, and it offsets any tax increase that would have to happen in the budget.
Okay, but it doesn't contribute toward the cost of the projects that are being funded by the bond, is that correct?
It covers almost half of the cost of the projects, correct?
No,
Oh, you
but
mean
it
out of
doesn't
pocket initially?
You're going to spend $40 million for this project, right, plus or
Right.
minus. You're going to get 47% back from
Correct.
the state, that money is used in a different way. It doesn't directly.
No, it's
offset.
used because we'll borrow, like, to do the projects, we have to borrow the money, and then we pay as we're paying the debt back, we're getting a revenue source to help pay that debt back.
So will you pay the debt back faster?
No,
With
no,
that
no,
money?
it's going to be over a course of 20 years, and 15 years of which we'll receive the money back from the state.
New York State only amortizes, their only payback schedule for their own budgeting purposes is 15 years. As I said before, if they owe you $1, you're going to get whatever, 6 cents a year for 15, well, that's bad math. But that's their schedule, so that's the way they pay us back, regardless of what the amount is.
So that would be in addition to what the state would normally provide in a
Correct,
given year?
yes.
Yeah, so the yearly aid we get from New York State is called foundation aid. This is called building aid, and they're separate categories, but yes, it is in addition to and separate from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Schlechter.
Hello.
How are you? I'll try to be brief. I want to address, I guess it falls under Proposition 3 and why we should proceed. I have 2 daughters who play varsity sports, and I just wanted to speak to that so everyone can listen and take it in. I want to preface by saying I completely respect everyone's concerns or issues about budget and their personal finances. That should go without saying. I also think it should be a healthy debate about the quality of turf or the filtration systems that you're discussing or the fill. Totally fair. However, what I don't think is up for debate, and there's been a lot of misinformation floating around, is that objectively, the sports of specifically field hockey and soccer for teenagers, the high school varsity level and the collegiate level, it is a turf sport. That ship sailed years ago, if not decades ago. It's not perfect, but like I said, that ship has sailed. 2 years ago, my younger daughter asked me after a soccer practice here at Burke to drive her to Dobbs Ferry. And I said, why? You just had practice. And she said, well, I have to practice again. Can you drive me to Springhurst Field in Dobbs Ferry? And I said, why? She said, well, all of our games are on turf, and I need to practice on turf to prepare for those games. That's with homework, that's with everything else. You wind up practicing twice. So the analogy that I joke with my friends about is that it's great to be nostalgic, and people may like VHS tapes and typewriters and all those things, but the entire region, the entire state has moved on to laptops. So you don't want to hold our kids back because every game that we have in the entire Section 1 is on turf. You're not preventing them from being exposed to turf because they're going to practice on turf anyway, and it's usually a much older, poorer quality turf. Every single college clinic or audition that my daughter has gone to is on turf. So this is basically a ship that's sailed, and I just implore the community not to hold the children back because, again, it's not perfect, but that is the way the sport is now for both field hockey and soccer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chloe Tisdale. Next up after that will be Francisco Sosa.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, I'm also going to ask a question about the turf, and it is a question. I would really like an understanding of what the phrase, the artificial turf installed here will not be manufactured with PFAS. And I have a follow-up question.
Sure. I mean, that's just New York State. So per New York State regulations, they ban the presence of PFAS in manufactured turf. And so
Well, no, in the manufacturing process, which doesn't
in the turf
mean
itself.
No, that's not what that language means. That language is specifically drafted so that the companies can have PFAS in their materials. They can source those materials, but as long as they don't add PFAS when manufacturing them, then they are legally covered. And you cannot, so when a school district like Portsmouth, New Hampshire is assured by the developers who are installing turf, when Ardsley is installing Pivot, right, which is made by Tenkate, which also on its website says we don't manufacture with PFAS. If you read the legal language, they do not guarantee that their surfaces will not have PFAS. And because they can't, because there's no way to make 40,000 pounds of plastic turf with or without infill, with coconut infill, you can put whatever you want in there. There's going to be PFAS in there. So my follow-up question is, who is going to be responsible when after those 2 turf fields are installed and we test them, because we will, and we find there's PFAS, where's the responsibility? Who's going to be responsible for that?
Well, I would say that the responsibility in the bid process, I mean, the specs say no PFAS, and if what you're saying is correct, then...
But they're not going to say no PFAS. They're going to say not manufactured with PFAS, which is a legal loophole, which allows companies to get away with installing turf that has PFAS, that exposes our kids. And to the point that our kids get exposed, I'm an epidemiologist. My goal is to improve health for children. What we want to do is risk reduction. We know we can't eliminate it. We're surrounded by PFAS. My kids play soccer. I have a second grader and a 4th grader. My 2nd grader plays on turf. I don't stop him from doing it, but I don't want him practicing every day and playing games every week on turf here. We want to reduce exposure, and the wave of the future is not going to be turf. The wave of the future, MLS does not allow, we have to reinstall grass fields in the United States to host the World Cup here because Major League Soccer in Europe, the women's team in the United States sued to say we don't want to play on turf because we get injured more and it's not safe for our reproductive health, for our long-term health, for the environment. It's not the wave of the future. I understand what you're saying, but I also think that we won the state championship playing on grass, as a former Hastings high school player pointed out. Dobbs plays on turf, we play on grass, we beat them. We beat them all the time. So I don't think turf is essential to create good athletes, but good sports fields are. And the fact that there is no alternative plan, if Prop 3 goes down, which I hope it does, what's the plan? Because I want my kids to be able to, I want your daughters to be able to play. I want the field hockey team to have a good, why can't we do this with grass? Scarsdale does it with grass, right? Why can't we?
I'm sorry?
Scarsdale plays on grass. They have grass fields, and they play in the rain. So it's possible. We can do it.
But
we don't have to
to
do
your
it.
point, we will continue to look into that
Scarsdale
issue.
turf.
Francisco Socha, next up, Dan Lemons.
All right. I appreciate all 5 of you for your time and for listening to us, and I appreciate my fellow residents' questions because I came here to learn, and I feel like I have learned. I didn't come thinking that I was going to ask a question, but something on the slide made me curious. I was under the impression that the propositions are divided into 1, 2, and 3, and the community is voting on 1, 2, and 3. It caught my eye when you put up for Proposition 3 that it's contingent on 1 and 2. Am I correct in that means if people don't vote for 1 and or 2, then 3 is dead on arrival? And if that assumption is correct, I'm curious as to why that is the approach that you've chosen.
So it's very common, structure of votes are contingent because there are, these are all needs, but at the end of the day, we have to prioritize things for the community. And that's why Proposition 1 is literally, people call them needs, but it's sort of like ICU level needs. These are things that could shut down function of the building. This really has to happen. So as a board, we felt it was responsible to sort of calve it off. The community certainly supported us in separating things for their own voting purposes. So to your point, 1 has to pass for 2. Everybody votes how they like. But when we add up the votes, if one has not passed, nothing passes. If 1 passes, we look to the votes for 2 to consider. Why 2? Because as we've sketched out tonight, we feel besides sort of the ICU level needs, we feel that a critical breakage in the middle school has been for years. The effect it's had on the students, the lack of space, specifically on special education students as well. So that's the next thing up to consider. So if 2 passes, then we would consider 3. So it's a common way to structure bonds. It's happened with the Ardsley bond, I believe, and that's sort of standard operating procedure.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Dan Lemons. Next up, Bob McKinnon. Then Rachel Thornton is the final speaker.
Good evening.
Hello.
First of all, Alex, it was good to see you give that broad kind of village perspective going to the comprehensive plan, because it is a we, it's not a us and them, it's a we, and I just wish we had had a session like this a year ago. We should have, because these are great. It's a good presentation. The questions, I think, and comments are really good. The responses are really important. We just needed it earlier, because I think there's just a lot flows into the gaps where there isn't information and there isn't discussion. Just a comment on Roger's question about the state aid, just another way to look at it in case anybody's still confused about it, because I was, and fortunately Maureen took some time and educated me about it, because I was looking in the budget to try to see where is this. And you see in the expense side of the school budget, there is debt service, and then you look on the revenue side and you'll see state aid and you'll see building aid. So the net debt service, really, you have to subtract the state aid from the total debt service, then you get the net debt service. That's what we're actually paying. And an interesting thing is, if you look at the 20-year financing of this bond, around $40 million, by my calculation, the state aid, of course, it's not really 47% because there's interest. And the state aid, it turns out, I wouldn't want to be pinned down on this without having somebody really look at this carefully, but just using a standard kind of loan amortization schedule, the state aid about covers the interest. So the community pays, by my calculation, pays the principal of the 40 million, maybe minus a little, and the state pays the interest on the loan. That's what the state aid will do. So it's about 30% by my calculation. But again, I'm not a professional, but that's just a rough ballpark idea. So I guess my question and comment is kind of coming back to Alex, to your kind of taking the broad village perspective. We all pay our taxes, 20% of it goes to the village to take care of a police department, support the fire, the library, all those things. And it's really clear from what you presented tonight and what's been presented before that our school buildings need a lot of repair. They need maintenance. They've had a lot, but they are going to need more. That's very clear. And I don't think that's probably going to be contested by too many people. And I think you're making the case as well that even though the student population is fairly steady over the years, instruction changes, delivery changes, so there's need for reconfiguration, and I personally don't need to be convinced of that. I can see that. So my main question about Proposition 2, and my issue, I think, around it is that because we know that going forward this won't be the last bond, there will need to be more, because there are these other maintenance things we know are there. Other things will come up. There will be more need for further financing, and I think it's pretty clear in the 5-year just projection of the school's annual budget that we do have very difficult times ahead in terms of paying for staff and hanging on to staff. I think that Rabbi Samuth's points are correct, that we all see that it's going to be challenging. So resources have to be managed and marshaled carefully, because it's going to be tough for all of us, and we all want to do what we need to do. So, yeah, there is a question here. So my question, I'm happy the architects are here today. The question is, if Proposition 2 doesn't pass, and so there's a need to go back and look at this in light of the needs that are outlined for classrooms and whatever other space, addressing the cafeteria issue. Is there a pathway for a solution that could come in at a lower cost but still address most of these needs?
So before they speak, thank you for the question, Dan. That was our question all along. Like, as I told you, we started with this idea that we were going to pop out the building from Cochran Gym and construct on the middle school playground. And then the question very quickly became, how can we do this as cheaply as possible? I mean, for lack of a better term, how could it be most efficient as possible? How could we get the space we need? So, that's really what this plan is. And to the point about, in the future, if we need more space, I mean, Farragut Complex is very complicated because it doesn't have leftover building envelope. There's no real easy way to do anything there. But that's part of the reason we brought in PBDW to do that space analysis. It was to really understand how the entirety of the building functions. Is there extra space? Is there something that we're not using? But also with that master plan, which again is not the bond, that documents in 4 phases, we kind of asked them, what's the reasonable max building envelope of the structure? So, for example, it's not in this bond, of course, but an extending the Washington wing out so it touches the other side. That is something that's reasonable, that can sort of be kept in our back pocket. That's why we have a master plan, so that things that we choose to do now don't forestall or foreclose us from reasonable options in the future. So that's really, the things you're thinking about are thoughts that were incorporated already. And, when you yourself raised some of these things, we went back and said, what about this? What about that? I mean, you remember some of the conversations we had. If you want to speak to a little bit about the issues that he raised, I think it'd be useful.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at alternatives in prioritizing what was it, a 14,000 square foot addition off the end of the Washington wing, and whether or not that would provide the same value, the same affordability to the community. And I think rather than was it the cheapest option, we were looking at providing the greatest value to the community for the dollar you're going to spend. And the outcome didn't make as much sense as unlocking the upper floor of Washington and providing a better food service component so you could provide the additional instructional spaces in the location of the school that you need them the most.
I don't remember the cost comparison to the two, but I don't think that they were so far off. The extension off of the Washington wing and the cafeteria. Am I wrong about that?
They were not that far apart. I want to say it was a difference of 14 million versus 10 million. So
And then the issue was also, remember the bridge?
But I'll
conditions
just
with the
say, I mean,
bridge.
we did get asked that question by the board, is should we do that addition instead and put classrooms in there? And first of all, I think the addition that we had originally scoped there wasn't really sized for classrooms. It was sized for middle school offices, department offices, which don't exist now and will continue not to exist. So even though middle school teachers do kind of double the amount of coordination by grade level and by subject, they don't have department offices, and they'll continue not to have department offices even after this. But the extension was meant to, the extension off of the Washington wing was meant for that. And I think it was meant for that because, or I know it was meant for that because the processional through, the circulation through the space is really, you don't want to go to the end of a hallway on one wing of, a multi-winged building to be able to get to new classrooms that are kind of your prime space. You want to be able to source those in the best part of the building as possible. And so that's really where the classrooms used to be, on the 3rd floor of the Washington wing. The circulation is there for that. Part of what we're doing with this bond is also addressing circulation issues throughout the building. So the new addition, the new entryway and the cafeteria on the same level also makes a lot of sense for flow and circulation, both for before school, after school, and during other periods as well, and kind of unclogging that clogged up circulation. So we weren't just looking at what is the most critical need for those classrooms and how do we tack classrooms onto the building. And there could potentially be a smaller dollar sign associated with that we felt very strongly would kind of clog up the potential for future solutions to really bring the school into a full ability to be able to resolve problems and expand over time or address needs over time as well. I don't even want to say expand over time, address needs over time. I think the second phase that we proposed was actually just moving departments around so that you can really regularize where your departments are and better communicate between different departments. So that second phase was only possible with that first one, but really would help a lot of what we heard were issues from department heads.
Yeah, so the sequence of the master plan was really critical to giving the best value and prioritizing the solution that is in the bond right now.
Yeah, and related but different, important point that you raised and Mark raised earlier about expenses and cost of schooling. It's nothing concrete really right now, but it's something we've mentioned in public meetings. New York State has launched this very nascent regionalization plan, which is basically like an idea of how schools can share services. And that's something that this board supported, that's something that I've been vocal about, that's something that Dr. McCursey has been vocal about. A year ago, New York State was sort of requiring districts, we're going to require districts to sort of sign up to this regionalization effort. Again, we didn't really know what it was. A lot of districts, most of districts, chose not to. But we talked it over as a board. Dr. McCursey entered into that agreement. And so, again, it's nothing very concrete, but we do all feel, when we look at the expense that schooling is these days, that something's going to change in the future. Maybe advanced classes will be taught remotely and students will take them across schools. There has to be something that changes. And again, it's not very concrete. I'm not promising anything like that, but it is an effort that we're absolutely looking towards because we do see it as part of the solution to the costs. So, anyone else? Thank you.
Bob McKinnon, then last question, Rachel Thornton.
Thanks. Hey, good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your time, your effort, the cookies, nice touch. Also, I wanted to remind everyone, in case you didn't know, Alex, I don't think this is your full-time job, although you wouldn't know it otherwise. So I just want to point out, I'm wearing a soccer outfit because it was my intention to coach one of the 3 teams tonight on Burke, but the field was pulled again. It did provide an opportunity to go to the field at Hillside and watch our girls softball team advance to the finals.
They won. Yeah.
So give it up for them. Ironically, that game was rescheduled from a rain out yesterday, but I'm not here to talk about rain or fields. What I saw after the game was our girls, all sophomores, high school students, performing the best they could. While they were playing, the Little League team of 6- and 7-year-olds were waiting for the game after. And after they saw these girls win, they flooded the field and they gave them hugs. That's community. That's one generation thinking about the next one. And let me preface my comments as someone who grew up with not a lot of financial means. If this bond is going to impact your family in a meaningful way and you don't get a deduction from the town to do that, I hope the town does something to make it affordable. And so I feel for anyone who that extra $500, is going to hurt. We should do something about that. I also am respectful of the people and the expertise in this room, in this community. We're blessed to have epidemiologists and architects and lawyers who can review documents and make comments and make constructive criticisms or try to make these plans better. At the same time, I want to remind us what this bond is about. It's an investment in our kids. It's the signal that we tell them that a community comes together and has a choice to vote, yes or no. Now, I know there are real reasons why you chose to separate these 3 into 3 stages. I wish you didn't. I wish we kept it so we can say, this is what we believe in. This is what we're going to invest in, and we trust you. And I want to speak a little bit about trust. Expertise is one thing. We all think that we know how to do something better. We can read, we research, we come with questions. But we elect a board, and they hire a super. And then we trust them to hire experts who do this. When did we stop trusting each other? I moved here 20 years ago, sorry, I'm lying, 15 years ago, and I remember someone telling me, like when I looked at the waterfront, I said, oh, when's this going to happen? And they said, don't worry, it'll happen when your kids are in high school. I was like, that can't possibly take that long. My kids are in high school and that's going nowhere. As a country and a community, we have to show that we can get shit done, pardon my language. And that's by making sure that, yes, we have these discussions, but when they're done, we come back and we vote and we support our kids. And I wonder what the signal is when they wake up the next day and they say, hey, we'll give you money to fix your roof, but we won't give you a cafeteria you can sit to eat. We won't give you a field because we don't like the way it's made, even though all of the other schools you go play on is the same type of field. Now, my understanding is if 2 or 3 go down, that we have to start this all over. And we have to sort of go back with a new bond, which my understanding takes months, maybe even longer, up to a year. Now, once a bond passes, stuff needs to get built. So now we're looking at years. I am tired of telling my kids that stuff can't get done in this town, and that the things that we are talking about now, they will never see. Because as it stands right now, my oldest won't. But you know what? She and other juniors or seniors are still saying, do it. Do it for my little sister. Do it for the next kid who comes behind. So I don't have a question other to say that I hope that as a community, we can have these discussions and then we can trust the people we elect and the people they hire to do what we know they can do, which is to get stuff done and invest in our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rachel Thornton, final speaker tonight.
Thank you. Hi, good evening.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I just wanted to say thank you for all the work you've put into all of this. It's really exciting. It's really hopeful. I'm a big fan of it. My questions are mostly about the third proposition. I live near the Burke Estate. I'm also involved in kind of the green scene here. So I wondered if, kind of echoing what Chloe said, if there's a legalese snafu, can we alter the language? Instead of using what's the required New York State language, can we write no PFAS in this product? And can we third-party test beforehand so that we know what we're putting down before it's down, if it is in fact not true? Because if you Google it online, you see communities that have had that problem. So that's my one question. And then another kind of follow-up on Chloe's is if that fails and if that product doesn't exist, which some of us are skeptical that it does, is there a plan B? Like some of the newer things that I know you can't send out to bid yet, would they be something you could circle back to if that happens?
Okay, so let me try to handle that. So we cannot change the language of the proposition because it's been noticed legally, you know, Prop 3 is going to be worded the way it is. But the issue you raise is something that the board will certainly look into. I mean, you know, it's new information. As far as a plan B, you know, as you mentioned, there are, you know, we are very constrained in the New York State bidding process. It's to prevent, on one side, districts from just doing whatever they want with state money. On the other side, it's sort of to protect districts. When New York State says, you know, a district has a small group of parents, they're not experts, you know, sort of the Music Man comes into town and says, do this. So they constrain the bid process. There's a lot of parameters. And so there are some cutting edge products that we looked into, but they weren't able to fit into the bid process. So, and that would still be true for the foreseeable future, because one of the characteristics that things need in order to be bid upon is sort of a track record of installations and things like that. So in general, I think we could talk to it if Prop 3 went down. I don't know, we would just sort of, when there's no like plan B hiding in the wings, we would just sort of reanalyze the situation with sort of the cards that are available for us to play. You know, one of the issues that we looked into, you know, it's sort of, I don't want to call it urban legend, but we all sort of, I raised this week, my impression was that one of the issues with Burke It's because the bedrock is so high that that's why, one of the reasons it stays so wet for so long. And we emailed about that, and he said, no, it's not, it's perfectly suitable. It's just the amount of playing time that you require from it, it's in and of itself compromises the surface. So that's not really an answer to your question, but we would just be back sort of trying to think what we could do, maybe fields on the waterfront, But Matt, if you want to speak to that at all,
Yeah, I mean, the primary issue is use. It's overuse. It's a lack of alternative options, both in the school district, recreationally throughout the community. There are just, if you were to come out to some of our suburban areas up in northern New York, in the Hudson Valley, there are school districts that are land rich, have multiple acres, and they rotate usage of the fields, and they're able to preserve their primary fields because they have alternate practice grass fields. And those are some of the locations where grass fields still thrive in New York State. And, we're not a for turf company per se. We design artificial turf fields, and we design natural grass fields and natural grass field solutions for all different school districts throughout the state. And there are different solutions for every community, but you are in more of an urban setting. This is not a land-rich school district with plenty of property to develop other locations for. And so you're always going to have that community use impact where not only are we dealing with the climate issues, but you also have a natural daylight issue where we lose daylight during spring and fall sports seasons earlier in the day. And so that compact amount of playing time limits the usage hours that you can get, and it disallows the community to use it recreationally. If you want to preserve that field to the highest standard or better quality standards, the cost of maintenance, the cost and investment and commitment to maintaining fields requires resting it so that it recovers after a rain event, so that it's treated properly after overuse so that you can make it less compact and more playable. So all of these are the types of use conditions that we experience and we confront in other school districts, other communities, and there are different solutions for different communities based on different circumstances. In your community, if you had plenty of land or other options, we could talk about other natural grass solutions. In this case, it's perhaps best based on your use and the limited amount of property to consider artificial turf.
Thank you.
I think, Rachel, you were saying, can we change the language of the specs, right?
Oh, okay. I don't have an answer for you at this moment, but it's certainly something we can get back to you on and look into.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, the specs were presented to the board in a consensus way to help guide the community to priorities, and this is an excellent question. So I think if indeed Prop 3 passes, right then, and the time frame is there's still months and months of work, so that time is a very specific time to focus down on the specifications and to clarify some of these very good questions. So.
Thank you. That's it. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Oh, Teresa, board member.
I'd like to say one thing. Peter, is that your name? You said, you raised a great question. What is the messaging to the students, to the children, if we were to move forward with these projects? And the messaging is, we care about your experience, and we're listening to you. I spend a lot of time with middle schoolers, and it is crowded and crammed and unsafe in the hallways because there's no room. It's really tight and uncomfortable. And I feel very strongly that if this doesn't happen, the messaging to the kids is going to be really negative.
You also said, it was Jody who said, sometimes parents are better than children. You were very out front against artificial turf, talking about, and you were public about it, so it's public.
Totally.
But a 13-year-old, who you know very well, who thinks that turf, injuries are hilarious. Okay? And that this thing about 90% survey was not a survey. Dr. Percy checked that it wasn't a survey. Jody checked it wasn't a survey. it doesn't, we care about it. We voted for every budget you guys put up, even since our kids are mom. God forbid, we care. We're supportive. What am I really concerned about? I'm concerned about catastrophic sports injuries, which I know something about. And I'm concerned about the need for maintaining our teachers and staff, and adding to teachers and staff and companies for the benefit of the kids. And it's really about prioritization. It's not us versus them. We're with you guys. We want the best for the community. We really, really do.
Thank you.
Everybody's talking about capital costs and nobody's talking about operating costs. So the dollars are dollars. If this doesn't apply where it's way, then I think the case is justice and the very point that they
I want to say, I hope we get the opportunity to do that, because that would be part of the process that we would go through with the board to be able to meet what the board wants us to do and what we can do for the building. So that will be part of the process.
Yeah.
That's something that we do as part of our design, is being able to analyze those. We have baselines that we've done already, and being able to push that as far as we can is something that we do as part of design, and we hope to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all again.